class. We have a lesson today, that is lesson number 14, jobs and titles. The name of the lesson, children, is jobs and titles. The author of this lesson is Lawrence Durrell. So I will just explain to you थोड़ा सा कुछ बताया कि लेसन के बारे में, या ये जो ऑथर जिसने ये लेसन लिखा है, and the characters of this story or this lesson. The first of all, सबसे पहले ये jobs और titles के बारे में मैं दो शब्द आप लोगों से कहना चाहती हूँ. उसका अर्थ क्या है? The phrase jobs and titles, it is that very small detail has received attention. That means बहुत छोटा सा detail level उसको attention दिया है. That is or a very small amount. A very small amount. एक छोटा सा एक हिस्सा. Okay? छोटा सा हिस्सा. That is the meaning. Or a tiny portion of something. मान लीजिए ये एक chalk है. This is a chalk. This is a tiny piece. अरे एक छोटा सा piece. उसको jobs and titles हम कह सकते हैं. That means a very small amount or a tiny portion of something. That is the meaning of jobs and titles, written by Lawrence Durrell. And now let's go on to the characters of this lesson. Characters of this lesson. Lesson first one, Pork Mowbray. He is the ambassador at the British Embassy in Yugoslavia. Then we have Androbus, Spalding, Dave Hunter, Millet, Dragon, Comrade Bobock, and Pepe. These are the few characters in the embassy, as in the ambassadors. हमारा कंट्री का, हमारा देश का ambassador दूसरा जगह में जाते हैं और दूसरा कंट्री का ambassador हमारे देश में आता है. इसी तरह these are our ambassadors and their companions. Okay, they about the story or the incident what we narrate in these jobs and titles. यही एक इनों में बारे में, that is jobs and titles. Now the author, and I just want to tell you थोड़ा सा एक author के बारे में. ज़्यादा बोलना नहीं चाहती हूँ कारण इतना बड़ा author तो नहीं. The author Lawrence Durrell is a British novelist. कहाँ उसका नाम, कहाँ का नागरिक थे? ब्रिटेन या ब्रिटिश थी. और he was a novelist जो नॉवल लिखते थे. He was a poet जो कविता लिखते थे. और एक ड्रामेटिस्ट. ड्रामेटिस्ट मीन्स जो ड्रामा लिखते थे. तो उसके उसका पेरेंट्स माने माँ बाप के बारे में भी हमको दूसरा कहना है. वो ब्रिटिश कॉलोनियल पीपल थे. मतलब यहाँ कॉलोनी जो हमारा स्वतंत्रता मिलने के पहले कौन हम लोगों को शासन करते थे? ब्रिटिश लोग. उसी समय लोग इधर आए थे. मतलब हमारा देश. उसका
We will read the lesson 14, Jots and Titles by Lawrence Durrell. In diplomacy, said Antrobus, quite small things can be one's undoing, things which in themselves may be purely inadvertent. The seasoned diplomat keeps a sharp eye out of these moments of doom and does what he can to avert them. Sometimes he succeeds, but sometimes he fails utterly, and then irreparable harm ensues. Foreigners are apt to be prematurely touchy in small ways, and I remember important negotiations being spoiled sometimes by a slip of the tongue or an imagined slight. I remember an Italian personage, for example, let's call him the Minister for Howls and Smells, who, with the temerity of ignorance, swarmed up the wrong side of the sea in sea Metz, flagship in Naples harbour, with a bunch of violets and a bottle of Strega as a gift from the civil servants of Naples. He was not only ordered off in rather stringent fashion, but passes were made at him with a brass sword botch hook. This indignity cost us dear, and we practically had to resort to massage to set things right. Then there was a Finnish ambassador's wife in Paris who slimed rigorously that her stomach took to rumbling quite audibly at receptions. I suppose she was hungry, but no sooner did she walk into a room with a buffet in it than her stomach set up growls of protest. She tried to pass it off by staring hard at other people, but it didn't work. Of course, people not in the know simply thought that someone upstairs was moving furniture about. But at private dinner parties, this characteristic was impossible to disguise. She would sit rumbling at her guest, who in a frenzy of lightness tried to raise their voices above the noise. She soon lost ground in the copse. Silence would fall at her parties, the one thing that diplomats fear more than anything else. When silence is being to fall, broken only by the rumbling of the lady's entrails, it is the beginning of the end. But quite the most illuminating example of this sort of things occurred on evening when Pope Mowbray swallowed a moth. I don't think I ever told you about it before. It is the sort of a thing one only talks about in the strictest confidence. It was at a dinner party given to the Communist People's Serbian Trade and Timber Guild, sometimes during Christmas week back in 52. Yugoslavia at that time had just broken with Stalin and was beginning to feel that the West was not entirely populated by capitalist hyenas, as the press said. They were still widely suspicious of us, of course, and it was a very hot and embarrassed little group of peasants dressed in dark suits who accepted Pope Mowbray's invitation to dinner at the embassy. Most of them spoke only their mother tongue. Comrade Bobok, however, the leader of the delegation, spoke a gnarled embryonic in English. There was a huge sweating Bosnian peasant with a bald head. His number 2, Pepik, spoke the sort of French that one imagines is learnt in mission houses in Polynesia. From a diplomat's point of view, they were heavy going. I shall say nothing about their messy food habits. Drage, the butler, kept circling the table and staring at them as if he had gone out of his senses. We were all pretty sweaty and constrained by the time the soup plates were removed. Conversation was clearly caveman stuff consisting of growls and snarls and varied flourishes of knife and fork. Bobuk and Pepik sat on the pockmarkways right and left respectively. They were flanked by Spratling, the commercial attaché, and myself. We were absolutely determined to make the evening a success. Dame Montbelly, for some curious reason, best known to himself, had decreed that we should eat turkey with mustard and follow it up with plum pudding. I suppose it was because it was Christmas week. Comrade Bobuk fell foul of the mustard almost at once, and only quenched himself by lengthy potations, which, however, were all to the good as they put him into good temper. The whole thing might have been carried off perfectly well had it not been for his blasted mouth, which had been circling the Gregorian candlesticks since the start of the dinner party, and which now elected to get burnt and crawl on the Pork Mowbray's side plate to die. Pork Mowbray himself was undergoing the fearful strain of decoding Comrade Bobok's weighty pleasantries, which were full of corrupt groups, and he let his attention wander for one fatal second. As he talked, he absolutely groped in his side plate for a piece of bread. He made the balls incessantly at dinner, as you know. Spradling and I saw a flash of horror. Something happened for which our long diplomatic constraining had not prepared us. Mind you, I saw a journalist eat a wine glass once, and once in Prague I saw a Hindu diplomat's wife drain a glass of vodka under the impression that it was water. She let out a moan which still rings in my ears, but never in all my long service have I seen an ambassador eat a moth. And this is precisely what Pork Mowbray did. He has a large and serviceable mouth, and into it Spradling and I saw the moth disappear. There was breathless pause, during which our poor ambassador suddenly realized that something was going wrong. His whole frame stiffened with a dreadful premonition. His large and expressive eyes became round and glassy with horror. This incident unluckily coincided with two others. The first was that Drage walked in with a blazing pudding stuck with holy. Our guests were somewhat startled by this apparition, and Comrade Bobok, under the vague impression that the blazing pud must be ushering in a spell of diplomatic toast, rose to his feet and cried loudly to Comrade Tito and the Communist People's Serbian Trade and Timber Guild, GVO. Fellow Serbs rose as one man shouted, GVO. By this time, however, light had begun to dawn on Pork Mowbray. He let out a hoarse, jarring cry, full of despair, and charred mouth, stood up, threw up his arms, and groped his way to the cafe on the sideboard, shaken by a paroxysm of coughing. Spradling and I rocked, I'm sorry to say, with hysterical giggles, followed him to pat him on the back. To the startled eyes of the Yugoslavs, we must have presented the picture of three diplomats laughing ourselves to death and slapping each other on the back at the sideboard and utterly ignoring the sacred toast. Worse still, before any of us could turn and explain the situation, Spradling's elbow connected to Drage's spinal cord. The butler missed his footing and scattered the pudding like an incendiary tomb all over the table and ourselves. If the Yugoslavs delegation sat there with the little odd bits of pudding blazing in their laps or on their waistcoats, utterly incapable of constructive thought, Swadling, I am sorry to say, was racked with goughs now, which were infectious to a degree. Dave Manville, who was holding the leg of the table and who had witnessed the tragedy, also started to laugh in a shrill feminine register. I must say, Pop Mowbray rallied gamely. He took an enormous gulp of wine from the carafe and led us all back to table with apologies and excuses which sounded, I must say, pretty thin. What communist could believe a capitalist hyena when he says that he has swallowed a moth? Drage was flashing about, snuffing out pieces of pudding. We made some attempt to save the evening, but in vain. The awful thing was that whenever Swadling caught Dame Adela's eyes, they both subsided into helpless laughter. The Yugoslavs were in an irremediable huff, and from then on they shut up like clams and took their collective leave even before the coffee was served. It was quite clear that Swadling's timber pact was going to founder in mutual mistrust once more. The whole affair was summed up by the Central Balkan Herald in its inimitable style as follows. We gather that the British Embassy organized a special dinner at which the Peace Day resistance was gloom pudding, and a thoroughly British evening was enjoyed by all. You couldn't say fairer than that, could you?